Hello and welcome to episode 3 of TL Blue, your fortnightly cybersecurity podcast focused on important cybersecurity news for Australian organisations. My name is Brad Morgan and I'm the Security Operations Centre Manager at Triskel Labs. Today I'm joined by Richard Granger, who is the Triskel Labs Global DFIR Lead. Rich, what have we got on the agenda for today?
So, as usual, a few topics to run through today, Brad. We're starting off with new month, new Ivanti Vulnerability.
I think we should make that a permanent feature at this point.
I think so. We're going to be talking about a post on some forums where a threat actor claims to have stolen Five Eyes data. Winnti new malware has been discovered.
That one's exciting.
Yeah, it should be quite interesting on that one. We've got a possible data breach at an Australian immigration consultancy, and we will be wrapping up with the vulnerability of the fortnight, which is, of course, going to be the Utils backdoor, which is all over the news the last few weeks.
It is, and I mean that had some opportunity to be an absolutely massive issue, didn't it? I'm excited 100%. To discuss that. Yeah. And obviously after that we'll touch on what we've actually been seeing in the SOC and in the DFIR team over the last fortnight as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, well look, let's get into our new permanent segment, Ivanti. Let's go into what Ivanti of issues they've had in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, not having a good run lately, are they?
No.
It seems like every couple of weeks there's a new CV being disclosed. This particular one was disclosed on the 3rd of April this year.
I remember I walked out of the office and I was just looking through my phone as I was walking to the train in the city, and I saw this thing come up going, new Ivanti vulnerability. I'm like, no, it can't be, surely not. And I actually had to go to the Ivanti site to see when they released the publication. I was absolutely staggered. So for anyone that isn't aware, this is a new set of vulnerabilities.
Different from what we've seen the last few months. This one is essentially allowing remote code execution or denial of service. Obviously, the RCE is what we care about. It's within the Ivanti Connect Secure and Polysecure gateways. And I think at the time of disclosure, there's about 29,000 exposed devices on Showdown. So
there was, and I went for a little bit of a hunt on Showdown today. Obviously, we're recording this on the 9th, so we've had a bit of time. Australian-based devices is actually pretty low, and I couldn't see a whole lot out there with the exposed vulnerability. So that is promising. Mind you, my Showdown skills aren't as good as some out there, so we'll wait and see.
Do you think that's because everyone's now moved to a different VPN provider?
We can only hope so, in all honesty. It's not to bag a product, but when you're having that many issues, we've discussed before, once a vulnerability is found in a particular tool, people are going to go and look at what's immediately surrounding that part of the code and try and find similar vulnerabilities or other issues. It just puts a spotlight on that. So look, that's probably why they're having such a bad time. But it just means that people have to be really, really vigilant if they're still out there using this tool.
Yeah. And it's not to, have a go at Ivanti. We've had a couple of clients, who've been impacted by Ivanti vulnerabilities, and they're like, should we change products? And it's, FortiGate, another great example. It seems like we have some major FortiGate issues every few months. So it's more making sure you're, aware of what you're using, you're vigilant around patching, you've got monitoring, you've got logging, and you're kind of on top of this stuff because, it is a perimeter device. You kind of need these things to, it's a bit like this 2024, everyone's working remotely or has some kind of remote capability. So you need them.
But let's be honest, we're not in 2020 anymore. People threw these things up in a hurry in 2020 when COVID hit. We're now out of COVID times. If you haven't taken the time to look at what you threw out there in a hurry back then, you need to do it. You need to make sure, as you say, you need to make sure you're patching these. You need to make sure what you've got out there is looked after and is secure, and make sure it's logging into a SIEM solution and you know what normal looks like.
Yep, 100%. In this particular one, they've updated their integrity checker tool, and there also is a patch that Ivanti have provided. So like you said, Brad, if you're running it, make sure it's patched.
Exactly. Yep. All right, let's move on to the next one. This one's interesting. So this is a threat actor claims to have stolen data belonging to the Five Eyes intelligence group after breaching a US national security technology contractor. Can you give us some insight on this one, mate?
Yeah, so this originated on breach forums, and essentially a user posted on there saying that themselves, alongside two other threat actors, have managed to breach a company called Acuity Inc. And this threat actor does actually, the one that made the post, does have a bit of a history of targeting groups like T-Mobile, government agencies and things like that. So
he got ICE and the Department of Defense previously as well, didn't he?
Yeah, so there's a bit of a reputation, you could say, associated with them. But essentially, they're saying that they've exfiltrated data, which is including names, emails, phone numbers of government, military, and Pentagon staff, as well as classified information between the Five Eyes. So obviously, the Five Eyes sort of partnership, if you're not familiar with that, is the US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah, and that's
a bit of a information sharing between the intelligence agencies.
And that's why we've included that here today. Obviously, if anyone out there is in defence, I'm sure you're well aware of how intertwined these things are. But it's something important for everyone to remember that this could actually be a supply chain attack. If you look at it from that level, they all work together, they all communicate together. It's very similar to that sort of supply chain issue. So it just highlights that you need to know who your partners are, and you need to make sure you've got great communication with them should something like this occur.
I mean, and this could be not necessarily a breach of the internal systems at Acuity. We've seen breaches where they might be using a third-party platform to host and store and transfer files. Move It was a great example last year where vulnerability was found in that, and that got absolutely abused by ransomware groups for extortion. So it's possible there could be something like this, that's happening there as well.
Exactly. And look, something I did pick up in the article as well is that they're saying the dump itself seems a little bit strange. They're saying there was some formatting issues that makes it incompatible with SQL, meaning it's a little bit hard to restore a local database for easier analysis. And there is also overlap between other breaches that this threat actor has been able to pull off before. So, that combined with the fact that most of the records look like they're as late as 2016, I guess there's more news to come on this one, maybe, to see how recent that data is.
Yep.
All right. I don't think we've spoken about an APT on this podcast yet, but let's touch on APT 41, or otherwise known as Winnti. Rich, if you want to jump into that one.
Yeah, so there has been some research that was performed, I believe it's by Trend Micro's team, who
That's correct,
do actually do some really good blog posts around
they do.
stuff.
I love reading their stuff. It's really, really good, and it's quite insightful, a lot of their stuff they put out.
This particular one is to do with a previously undocumented malware called, I'm probably going to butcher the name here, UNAPIMON.
We did agree on that one, so let's move.
Yep, we'll just say it's that and move forward. And essentially, what it's doing is it's injecting the malicious code into legitimate tools. In this case, VMware tools. Which obviously if you're running ESXi as your hypervisor, you're probably going to have that running on your servers, the underlying servers on it. And essentially can start to do malicious stuff once it's in there and evade detection.
So, I mean, that scares me. So this is primarily targeting servers and people with those tools on their system. So this isn't aiming for your day-to-day end users. This is definitely looking for something a lot further up the chain. Is that your take on this?
Yeah, it's the majority of the information that this particular group would be after, if it's an APT sponsor group there, and specifically ones that are associated with the CCP are more about information gathering. So servers are naturally going to be the main target for stuff like this.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I'm always blown away by this sort of thing. One would think that modern EDR tools are a lot harder to bypass, but when you read into this, it seems so. It just makes sense, doesn't it? That they've gone down this attack vector. I mean, we had a discussion internally with one of our red teamers recently who has gone about it another way to be able to evade detection, which scared us all. But what can organizations do to try and protect themselves against this one?
I think it's all like we always talk about, defense in depth to try and prevent this kind of stuff from happening. Like this particular malware is not just going to magically appear on a server. Like there's going to be something leading to it being deployed, and it's all about trying to catch that early on and prevent it from getting to that stage where it's bypassing your EDR tool, which it's not great.
What you're saying is an admin shouldn't be browsing the internet from a server?
Yeah, definitely not.
They shouldn't be checking their email from a server either.
Yeah, yes.
It's making sure that your servers aren't able to have those kinds of connections and making sure they're protected so that if somehow someone plugs a thumbstick in and this gets on there, it can't call out to the endpoints that it is trying to go back to for command and control, that sort of thing. So it's stop it from getting on there in the first place. But if someone is silly enough to bring in a compromised thumbstick and plug it in, I mean, not that you can, but if they do, making sure that there is no possibility for that outbound communication as well.
Yeah, that's something we talk about a lot. Like when we're at the point of restoring systems during DFIR engagements and containment and stuff like that, it's all around network segregation. So having your servers in their own VLAN, having anything that's internet facing. Like, if you're running an SFTP server, that's in its own VLAN, that's locked down so that, only trusted IP address can access and stuff like that. It's just making it harder for threat actors if they're able to get that foothold.
Exactly. Deny all and allow by what you really need.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. This one's a newer one, so we're not going to have too much data on it, but there is news of an Australian immigration consultancy that has apparently been breached with reports of 300 gigabytes of data allegedly stolen.
Yes, the Cyber Daily put out a article on this I think it was on Monday. Essentially, it's a organization that's appears to be a Australian immigration consultancy helping people immigrate. So no doubt there's going to be a lot of sort of sensitive information that this organisation holds. And from what it seems, it's kind of like a typical ransomware attack at this stage. Threat actors claiming that they've exfiltrated data, threatening to leak it on their leak site, and trying to extort a payment out of the victim organisation.
Yeah, look, I mean, this one's pretty close to home. They're just down the road on Collins Street from us, and several offices in Melbourne as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's affecting people that we know. So we'll look to keep people posted on this one. I think it's going to be an ongoing story as more information comes to light on this one.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Let's jump into vulnerability of the fortnight. This one is not Ivanti. We're looking at CVE 2024-3094, which is the XZ Utils backdoor. This one is concerning, to understate it.
Yes, it is.
I mean, I don't know where to start with this one. I'm sure most people have read about it, but in case you've been under a rock, let's go over the basics.
Yeah, so in terms of I would recommend that everyone goes and has a full read of this. Ars Technica have a good article on it. Wired have a good article. There's a couple of good infographics that have been done as well to kind of break it down. But essentially, why this is a big deal is it's to do with XZ Utils. So it's open source tools and libraries for XZ compression. And why it's a big deal is because those libraries are used within a lot of Linux distributions as well. So if you're thinking, a lot of enterprises will have some variation of Linux running in their environment.
Well, it's pretty heavy I thought, from what I was reading, it's pretty heavy in Ubuntu and Red Hat.
Yes. So very popular distros of Linux as well.
Yeah. Sorry, it was Debian and Red Hat. Sorry, not just Ubuntu. Sorry.
Yep. And what it essentially does, and there are some great articles that will go into the technical details, but in a nutshell, essentially it's attaching to SSHD. So the functionality that allows a user to SSH and connect to a server. So it's not a typical kind of command and control that we would normally associate with something like this, where it's sort of beaconing out to a threat actor's infrastructure. It's kind of sitting there waiting for someone to try and SSH into the machine.
Yep. And I think they were able to upload their own certificate, their own access key to be able to access if it had been pulled off, which is pretty, it's a great idea.
Yeah, and that's kind of the crazy thing about this whole thing, right? Is essentially it's the user account. So it's Gian Tan, who is basically the one that has been attributed to this. And there's some great articles talking about whether this might be someone from a state-sponsored group in China or Russia. I think it's safe to say that no matter where it originated from, it's definitely state-sponsored, because this has been going on for years. This is a carefully sort of planned and coordinated thing that's happened.
It has, and some of the identities that they've had pop up as well. It wasn't just that one user. There's been several that sort of pop up, take part, and then disappear. So, it does take a lot of sophistication to be able to pull that off.
Building trust and, in an account to be able to pull off something like this. But, I mean, unfortunately for them, fortunately for everyone else, a principal software engineer at Microsoft identified this and sort of, blew it open for the wider security community.
And I had to listen to an interview that he did recently with another podcast, and listening to his description of it, of how he found it, it was a fluke, absolute fluke that he found it. If anyone has the opportunity to go and have a listen to any interviews that he's done or read into the articles, as Richard said, I highly recommend it. It just shows how close we came to this being adopted. I mean, we were still 12 to 18 months from this being in a general release version of Linux that people are actually going to be deploying, but it is just amazing how they came across this. Look, I'm sure it'll bring back some of the arguments of open source versus proprietary, but there's nothing saying that proprietary is any better than open source either. So, yeah, it's definitely an interesting one.
SolarWinds, great example again of proprietary software with this kind of thing happening. So yeah, it's a very interesting article and series of articles out there. I think we got lucky on this one. Yeah, quite fascinating at the same time as well.
Exactly. So, all right, excellent. Mate, let's move on to what we're seeing in the SOC and DFIR at the moment. Have you got anything in particular you wanted to discuss?
Yeah, so we had an incident that was originally raised by the SOC and then escalated to DFIR, and obviously not going into specifics around it, but you may remember from last episode, Brad, we discussed the FortiGate EMS vulnerability. And that was involved in this incident. And it wasn't that, it wasn't on people's radars. It was, believe it or not, the patching was approved. The change was scheduled for the afternoon that it was exploited. So really unfortunate timing there.
Yeah. And that's, I do want to stress that this client was pretty on the ball to have been able to get that approved and have it planned in. But it was just, again, too slow. When you can go and search the internet for these vulnerabilities, these days it's very, very quick to go and do discovery. Unfortunately, we have to be quicker as defenders. So yeah, can you go into how it was exploited and how the SOC found it?
Yeah, so essentially it was the end goal there was remote code execution on the server, which was successful. So the threat actor actually issued a command to download and execute something on the server. In this case, it was Atira. So for those listeners not familiar with Atira, it's a remote monitoring and management tool, or RMM tool, which is legitimate. Like, MSPs do use it, people do use it internally, but we see threat actors use it as well, unfortunately.
And this is somewhere I want to touch on that. If you don't use these tools internally, again, on a server, don't let it go outbound to download it. That should have been blocked at the firewall. There should have been no ability for that to go and download this tool, and it was stopped there and then.
Yeah.
But carry on, please.
Yeah, fortunately, they were running CrowdStrike on this server, which basically picked it up straight away. And it's like, yeah, not on my watch. And it did block the execution of Atira, firing an alert for the SOC. And essentially, that's where the triaging began and sort of understanding what had happened. The host was isolated pretty quickly. We took a disk image of that and did an investigation in DFIR as well, just to make sure there was no other evidence of exploitation, which fortunately there wasn't. So it did turn out everything worked as intended in terms of identification and the escalation process and everything like that. And the fact that there was no other exploitation was good as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, and that's the key takeaway for me, right? The SOC functioned as expected. The EDR tool was there to be able to detect the unusual activity. The SOC team picked it up in really, really good time and followed our internal and client-side escalation process, made the client aware. They confirmed, no, it wasn't them. And then they came to the DFIR team to go, hey, can we have a look into this? And I remember you messaged me going, Atira, that's never good.
Yes.
We have seen it in a number of DFIR engagements. Yeah, look, it's one of those things that we can't say this often enough. Defense in depth is critical, and it's throwing back to what I said earlier about servers not having the ability to reach out and download things that they shouldn't be downloading. Making sure that you do have the appropriate network segmentation and all of that sort of thing. Ensuring that there is CrowdStrike and EDR and SIEM tools deployed across your fleet. it just goes a long way to preventing this type of thing. But it's also making sure that processes are in place once you have all of that deployed. There's no point having these tools out there if you're not monitoring them. It's also not enough to go, we look at them during business hours. You can't. Attackers most of the time are going to be European or Asian based, operating on different business hours.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much every single DFIR engagement we have, particularly with ransomware, it's going to be a lot of activity sort of around 10 p.m. our time, until the early hours of the morning. And unless there's sort of eyes on glass for that period, most of the time threat actors are going to be able to sort of do whatever they want to do.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's why it's so critical for organizations that do have these types of concerns. They don't have to engage us, but engage someone to be monitoring these platforms for you outside of your standard business hours.
Yeah.
Make sure you have the appropriate escalation processes and you know what to do should the worst happen.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, mate. Well, I think with that, we can wrap this one up. So thank you very much for your time to the listeners, and also Richard, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, everyone. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you.